Alright, so Crimson Desert is back in the news with a bunch of exciting new gameplay and of course a big breakdown of how combos work, and even more so we have first hands-on impressions from folks who managed to play the game for at least an hour during an event that's still happening right now in South Korea. So lots to talk about in this video. Even more will follow soon in terms of details in the next few days as more and more media outlets and content creators post their first impressions of the game. So looks really exciting. This is one of my most anticipated games of 2025, so let's jump right in with all the info. And of course, we're going to start things off with the fact that if you're in South Korea or planning to go over there, there's the 2024 G-Star event. Yeah, Pearl Abyss set up their own booth over there. It looks really massive, and I believe it started on the 14th of November and it will last up until the 17th. So theoretically, you may still have 1 or 2 days to go ahead and try out the game for yourself. There are many computers and they pretty much let you play for about 1 hour or so. Everything I've seen so far makes it more and more difficult for me to contain my excitement for the game. I've been burned like this before, but at least there's one thing I'm confident about that Pearl Abyss can pull off successfully, and that is the combat. And lucky enough, we have some brand new information on how combos work. Pearl Abyss, well, Crimson Desert main Twitter account posted some new gameplay snippets as well as some button combinations for various combos and attack moves. So to give you a quick overview of our buttons and what they do, we're going to use a combination between the trigger and the face buttons, where the triggers are basically your normal actions. So R1 and R2 are your sword, light, and heavy attack respectively. Meanwhile, L1 is going to be your shield block / shield parry. But besides this, as you can see, we also have the face buttons, so triangle, circle, X, and square. I'm going to use, by the way, the PlayStation controller scheme since that's what I'm most familiar with, to pull off other attacks like kicking, jumping, grabbing, and whatnot. And we can even use different combinations between these for different moves and attacks that may perform different actions. So just to go over a few examples right here, I'm going to break it down piece by piece, starting with this very Milady from Elden Ring DLC inspired move where the character extends his arm with the sword to the side. We pull this off basically by holding down R1 and L1, so the light sword attack button and the shield block button at the same time. Now we don't really see what this does. It may be some kind of counterattack follow-up move if the enemy were to hit us, but in this case this character follows up with a directional input plus circle and X, which is performing this very interesting kind of like forward / gap closing attack that's also dealing a ton of damage against the target. So obviously a very useful move, a pierce attack that's likely going to take enemies by surprise given how fast this triggers. But then we can see it pulling off a square right after. So using square, we can use enemies as literal trampolines, kind of launching ourselves in the air if they have been, I guess, previously staggered, or at the very least in this case, just distracted, because that's basically it. But using that square, you can launch off that target and then follow up with other attacks. In this case, like I said, triangle is the kick, and if you pull it mid-air, it kind of does this series of kicks over here from mid-air, which are pretty useful at actually just stomping the enemy in the face, and of course also just making them fall even further. So this can help quite a bit to combo with your other attacks. Besides this, we can see that on the ground we can use our light sword attack, which is going to perform a quick stab. And then there are others right here. So one that is my favorite basically is the one that follows right after this, which is the grab attack. We can pull this off with the triangle plus the circle. So using that kick button plus the dodge button basically gives you the grab, which lets you throw enemies. Again, this will depend, by the way, on where the enemy is and your angle relative to theirs. But in this case, face to face, it grabs the enemy, throws them, and then you can follow up with other attacks. So it uses circle to dodge / charge forward. So holding down that circle momentarily lets the character charge further a little bit over here, and then does a dodge when whoever plays this presses it again, and then you can follow up with another series of kicks. Again, on the ground it will be different. It's pretty much like kicking a football over here. It's like Beckham playing with the football, but except the football is your enemy. But besides that, there's another grab attack that happens on the ground right here. Again, circle and triangle, grabs the enemy and does this Stone Cold Steve Austin slam dunk on the enemy, pretty much WWE with the enemy through and through. Looks absolutely hilarious, but also very impactful. I cannot wait to just mess with enemies like this. This is like pretty much a Shorts dream come true. I can expect so many moves like these coming out when the game actually launches. It's unreal. We then also have this secondary clip which shows even more movesets and other great instances of how you can counter enemies. So in this case, we can perform a shield bash, a very good shield bash by holding down L1 and then pressing R2. So this can seemingly be very useful against enemies that also hold shields themselves, so that you can kind of stagger them momentarily and just bypass their defenses. As you can see in this case, we can follow up with that circle and X quick stab attack, which seems to be very useful. By the time the enemy even wakes up, you can already dish out some really high damage against its HP bar. So a very good option to have as a shield bash. Besides that, we also have our normal chain of attacks with the light and heavy combos, which by the way we can mix and match. But I do want to talk about a very interesting combo here between the two. So if you press both the light and the heavy sword attacks, so both R1 and R2 at the same time, instead of using only the one-handed sword attack, you're going to wield it with both of your hands and then unleash much stronger overhead and other cross slash attacks, which deal 2 instances of damage per hit, which in turn means more damage against the enemy's HP. It even has these stronger effects, pretty much like in Black Desert Online, so obviously this is your moveset to go. But guess what? We can also mix and match these with our other regular combos. So for example, later on during a kick that the character does, we can see that following up with the same sort of double move of the R1 and R2, instead now performs also a kick attack mid-air and follows with another different cross slash, a little bit different than the other two right after. So many combo opportunities, pretty much very reminiscent of Black Desert Online. I could never get all the combos right in that game, and something tells me that there are gonna be a lot of combos that people will discover here. These are some of the greatest hallmarks of a good combat. I'm just not gonna lie. Maybe I'm a bit hyped about the footage, but that's how I feel this is going to turn out to be. But with that out of the way, let's also go over some of the early impressions and some of the early boss fights. I'm seeing a lot of impressions online quickly posted here, and most of them, if not overwhelming majority of them, seem to be highly positive about the game. Especially the combat seems to attract some of the highest praises. And on top of that, I'm seeing some comparisons with Souls-like, which to me don't really make any sense, especially for Pearl Abyss, which has a unique enough combat style to stand on its own 2 feet, but expect a lot of more of these quote-unquote noobish comparisons in the next few days. However, in the meantime, we have this article from But Why Though? I beat 4 Crimson Desert bosses and now I am hooked. And the article goes on to explain a bit more about especially some of the early bosses, the combat, and even some loot drops. So once you jump into the game, the combat immediately takes hold of you. The choice to make the combat in Crimson Desert combo-based is its strength. This choice also keeps the player from button mashing, which is sometimes my default in a new game when I encounter my first mob of enemies. With anxious hands, I tried to find my grounding, but I couldn't until I looked to the guide at my side. Once it was established that my combat choices needed to be thorough, everything clicked into place. And it explains a bit furthermore about what types of combos you have. So there is a set of combos for kicks, sword swings, grapples that include perfect pro wrestling suplexes, as well as your magical abilities. Add in blocking and parrying with your shield and judging when to use your bow, and there is more than enough to learn and to work into paced rotations against enemies. That said, when you're being attacked from all sides, it's better to use the interactive environment to your advantage to take some of the anxiety away. However, as interesting as combat against average enemies is, Crimson Desert's boss design, both visually and mechanically, has turned the game into one of my most anticipated. So here is where it becomes a lot juicier. We have another glimpse of another boss right here, which I believe is Whitehorn, the first boss we get to fight, I guess, in the game, or one of the first bosses. So here are some details about it. In just 90 minutes, I found my footing and then proceeded to fight and hopefully defeat 4 bosses. Broken down by the length of time expected to defeat, the 4 bosses represented the game's different fighting styles and aesthetics. We had the Reed Devil, White Horn, Stag Lord, and the intimidating Queen Stoneback Crab. When each boss was explained to me, I decided to tackle them by going with the style I'm most used to down to the ones I am not. So let's start with the preview of the White Horn, that boss that we see right here in the screenshot. I'm not sure if we have any gameplay footage of it, but the creature design with the first boss is breathtaking. The article notes, a folkloric beast that reminded me of some Korean webtoon rendition of whatever this is. It beautifully highlights the variety of folkloric elements, even in a heavily Celtic and Norse-inspired game. A snowy creature on a mountain with horns, White Horn's fight style is what you would expect, with a lot of charging, more than a few areas of effect attacks, and weather events that rain down dangerous ice. Dodging is your biggest strength, well that, and explosive arrows. Once you figure out White Horn's rotation, avoiding him is the easiest part, but when your combat relies on combo inputs, it can get difficult to know when you have the window to attack and when you're getting greedy and going to suffer the consequences. That keeps the difficulty engaging without ever making the boss feel overwhelmed. Explained as being one of the easiest fights, smart use of ranged attacks and big heavy attacks deal enough damage to get you through, but the most fun part of the boss fight is that you can climb White Horn's back and inflict damage while attacking with one hand and holding onto his fur with the other. And that gets me really excited, the fact that you can still be punished if you're greedy with attacks, as well as the fact that you can climb on enemies' backs. I mean, I think that we've seen the Stoneback Queen. There was a sequence of it in one of these shots right here that kind of showcased a bit of that climbing on the enemy's back moveset. We then also have another one of the Stag Lord. We also broke down the combat during a moment against this enemy. But yeah, after White Horn, I took on the Crimson Desert's Stag Lord, dressed in Celtic armor with gorgeously ornate weaponry that, by the way, you can collect upon beating him. So how awesome is that? Stag Lord is a sword and board boss. Since you play as Cliff, who also uses the same weapons, much of the fight is best done by dodging into a parry and then landing a post-parry attack to deal the most damage. But like we saw in that breakdown video, you can also use a shield bash, which helps a ton against its defenses. That said, blocking Stag Lord's attacks has to be strategic. He doesn't hit as many times as White Horn before him, or even the boss after him, but it takes away large chunks of your HP when he does. Even when you block, the chip damage from the blocks does add up, with an unblockable attack putting you at a disadvantage if you choose to take the hit. We also had some information about a third boss battle, which is the Reed Devil. So my third boss battle was with the Reed Devil, a vision out of Robert Eggers' film. The Reed Devil is about stealth and speed. The boss uses clones and distractions to keep you from finding your footing in the fight. While he doesn't do the damage that the 2 previous bosses dealt, the speed with which he dishes out multiple strikes causes a death by 1,000 cuts, which was how the reps in the room described it. Additionally, he summons wicker totems that must be destroyed while you take damage from the Reed Devil the entire time. So I'm not sure exactly if that's going to apply anything, but the strategy here is to just hit the boss. Essentially, keep the gap closed so that when he disappears and respawns, it's easier to locate him. Ultimately, the Reed Devil feels like a boss you have to burn through lest he take chip after chip of your health until you have nothing left. This one is less about dodging and more about letting go of, again, afraid of taking damage and meeting it when it comes. So yeah, definitely something that you have to get accustomed with. I really enjoy games that kinda put your abilities to the test instead of being just like a boring carousel of going in and doing the same repetitive thing over and over. So I'm really glad when games actually present a challenge that is actually fun to overcome, not just something that, you know, may have a lot of HP or takes a lot of hits from you. Now, ultimately, for the Queen Stoneback Crab, you have to break formation that guard weak points, deal damage to the weak points, and then finally perform a very specific combo to break the chimney on the top of her head. Awakened and seemingly in pain, breaking the chimney settles her and lulls back into becoming a part of the gorgeous landscape. while there are only 3 steps to completing the boss battle, its time designation is long. Queen Stoneback Crab is all but finesse and understanding the mechanics. You have to time your combos and understand just how far to swing and right time to deal damage, and honestly the right time to wait. Like I said, a lot of those air vents push you through the air, so yeah, it totally makes sense. But like the article notes right here, having this variety of boss fights just in like the starting phases of the game already gets me quite excited for it. It seems to be like everything that I wanted from an open world game. Has cool combat, has cool bosses, bosses also drop loot. So from here I'm really curious to see what other locations we may have, what other events may happen in the open world. These are my 2 biggest concerns, leaving off some of these early previews. But of course, as we're getting closer to launch and next year, we're gonna see more and more of that. For now, this has been pretty much the article. You can go ahead and read more of it by following the links down below. But basically, so far, looking very promising. Again, let me know down below what you think. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.